Hello, welcome to Talking Europe on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson, and our guest today is a member of the British Parliament who's set himself up in a head-on clash with Boris Johnson. Dominic Grieve is a former Conservative Attorney General under David Cameron, but when he voted on September 4th of this year for a law aimed at stopping a no-deal Brexit, his own party forced him to become an independent MP. Now, he's also convinced Parliament to back a legal bid to compel Boris Johnson's team to publish their messages regarding the suspension or prorogation of Parliament, telling the government it has to decide whether it is, and I quote, a bunch of hoodlums who are just smashing the place up to achieve a particular end, or a respectable group of people trying to operate within our constitutional laws. Thanks very much for being with us, Dominic Grieve. Those very strong words there about the prorogation. I'd like to start with that issue. Scotland's highest court on Wednesday of this week ruled that the prorogation of the British Parliament is unlawful. What effect do you expect that this will actually have?
The case is undoubtedly going to be appealed to the Supreme Court, along with a similar English case. And the Supreme Court, I'm not sure whether the Supreme Court will do both cases together or will just deal with the Scottish case. But the Supreme Court decision will be the one that is in fact going to decide this. And if the Supreme Court rules and supports the Court of Appeal in Edinburgh, then in those circumstances, the Parliament will have to come back. There has been suggestions by colleagues that Parliament ought to return anyway, pending the ruling by the Supreme Court. But the government has shown to date no intention of doing that.
Well, yes, the prorogation sparked protests, people marching in the streets shouting, "Stop the coup," a lot of feeling there among the British public. But Boris Johnson has said it's actually just a few days longer than the usual party conference recess, and he wanted this prorogation to get ready for a new policy agenda. What do you make of that argument? It has been the longest parliament since the English Civil War.
The trouble is that argument has turned out to be completely untenable. Firstly, it's turned out to be factually inaccurate because evidence has started to emerge in the court proceedings. That the government was claiming it only made this decision in late August. The 23rd of August, the Prime Minister was saying he had no intention to prorogue. In fact, they were laying plans to do this much earlier in the course of the month. And we now also know that the intention, and I think the court was quite clear about this, the intention wasn't just a reset with a Queen's speech. The intention was to try to make sure Parliament wasn't sitting at an inconvenient time for the government. And that is a wholly improper way of conducting business. And the suspension of Parliament was for a very long period, much longer than is usual. The argument was put forward where we were going to adjourn anyway in order to have the party conferences, but it was well known to the government that the House of Commons was going to object to being adjourned because of the national crisis and wanted to continue sitting through September and October.
All right, so you clearly suspect games being played, and on the last day of Parliament sitting on Monday the 9th, you got Parliament to back a vote, in fact, to order Boris Johnson's advisers to release their communications regarding the prorogation. Well, on the side of number 10 Downing Street, they're indicating at least that they're not going to release those communications. The current Attorney General, in fact, has also advised that legally nothing has to be released. So you're also a QC. Who's right, him or you?
If the House of Commons asks in a humble address for documents, it would be unprecedented for those documents not to be supplied insofar as they are within the control of the government. Now, the one argument the government's made is that these documents, which are electronic, may be in the hands of individuals on their private email systems who are government employees. But if that is the case, they shouldn't be on their private systems. All official business in government should be conducted on official systems. And it is perfectly within the government's power to ask those employees to provide that information if they've got it and to verify that it has been supplied. And if they refuse to, then that would be a serious disciplinary matter and they would almost certainly have to be sacked immediately.
So if the communications aren't released, what action would you be taking?
If the communications aren't released, then the decision as to what happens next is for the House of Commons collectively. But it is a very serious matter. And I would assume that when Parliament reassembles, whether it's early because of this court ruling or on the 14th of October, the House will move probably very swiftly to taking, if necessary, punitive measures against the government in respect of it.
All right, well, moving on to that anti-no deal legislation that we mentioned that you supported. This is, just to remind our viewers, in fact, legislation that requires the UK government to ask the EU for an extension to the Brexit process if Parliament has not agreed to a deal before October the 19th. So, Mr. Grieve, we'll take a listen to what Boris Johnson said on Monday, the 9th of September, about a delay to Brexit.
If you really want to delay Brexit beyond October the 31st, which is what you seem to want to do, then vote for an election and let the people decide. Let the people decide if they want to delay or not. And if you refuse to do that tonight, then I will go to Brussels. I will go to Brussels. Our government will go to Brussels on October the 17th and negotiate our departure on the 31st of October. Hopefully with a deal, Mr. Speaker, but without one if necessary. I will not ask for another delay.
Dominic Grieve, two things to pick up from there, I think. Firstly, the Prime Minister said several times, in fact, he is working on getting a deal. He said, I will go back to Brussels and negotiate. His negotiator, David Frost, has been in Brussels several times. Do you disbelieve him that he's trying to negotiate?
There's not much evidence of negotiation. I was very struck by the fact that when my colleague Amber Rudd resigned as Secretary of State of Work and Pensions in the course of the last week, she indicated that there were no preparations taking place for negotiation that she was aware of at all. So again, there's a major trust issue here in the government, which I'm afraid is a frequent event nowadays. I just don't think the government can be believed on this.
Well, on trust then, the second thing to pick up from that soundbite, Boris Johnson saying the UK would leave the EU, hopefully with a deal, he says, but without one if necessary. This is after the anti-no deal law was passed. He said that. Do you believe that he would, in fact, break the law?
He's simply wrong. Well, I don't think he will be in a position to break the law. So I think this is a bit of froth. Ultimately, governments have to obey the law. If a Prime Minister tries to disobey the law, and an application will be made to the courts to get him to obey it, and if he tried to disregard that, the entire government system would collapse. All the civil service, the senior civil servants would refuse to work with him. His colleagues, particularly those who are there to uphold the rule of law, like the Attorney General and the Lord Chancellor, would have to resign on the spot, and the entire machinery of government would collapse. So I just think that this is a fantasy, and he doesn't seem to have grasped that prime ministers are not above the law, and if the law says a prime minister has to do something, he's going to have to do it.
Well, of course, there has been a lot of speculation about the possibility that the Prime Minister could break the law, and there has been talk of the opposition forcing a no-confidence vote, or in whatever circumstances that there wasn't a Prime Minister, installing a new interim Prime Minister with bloc support from the opposition. Is that something that you would support in order to avert a no-deal Brexit?
I would be prepared to contemplate that, although I think it's important that we not only think about stopping a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, but how we are going to get the United Kingdom out of the mess it's got itself into. One possibility is that we get an extension to the 31st of January if the EU will give it to us, which I very much hope it will, and we have a general election. Now, that is a democratic event, and it may lead to unblocking the logjam. But there is a serious risk, particularly if you look at the opinion polls as they stand at present, that in fact we find at the end of the day that we get a parliament comes back at the end of November. I've no idea if I'll be in it or not, but that the parliament faces exactly the same problems that it's had up to now in being able to resolve this issue. So I would suggest to my parliamentary colleagues that it would be more sensible if we were to come together to try to find a way of getting out of this mess. And the only possible way out of this mess is to have a referendum.
All right. Well, all of this, of course, completely depends on the European Union allowing an extension, should one be requested. Now, recently we had Jean-Yves Le Drian, the French foreign minister, talking about in the current state of things, he doesn't see that the EU would want to give an extension, or France at least. Isn't it possible that European leaders might just say, look, this has been going on for far too long now. We are prepared for no deal. Let's end it now.
It's possible, but I would strongly recommend to them that they don't do that. I think Angela Merkel has understood this issue, I think, very clearly, when I think she made the comment a little while ago during the extension in March that it would not be a good thing for the European Union and its future to be seen to be throwing out a member who wishes to remain and has been operating within its rules, which we always have. And I think it would be a very bad move for the European Union. And quite apart from that, if you look at the question of mutual benefit, it's quite obvious that our staying in the EU will be beneficial to our EU partners. And leaving the EU with no deal will be damaging, even though I accept that the EU, United Kingdom, will probably be the most damaged place of the lot, apart possibly from Ireland. I think on the whole, I'm quietly optimistic that as long as our extension is for a valid democratic purpose, we will be able to get it. The UK Parliament's already put into place all the necessary measures to prevent that happening. And I hope that will be responded to positively at a European end.
Dominic Grieve, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for your time. And thanks to you for watching. We'll see you soon for more European news on France 24.